The Arizona Territory, 1884. A place where the law was thin and a woman's reputation could be shredded faster than a tumbleweed in a gale. Narlin was an outcast, a widowed Apache woman living on the edge of a town that hated her, waiting for the day the world would finally break her. So when Caleb Thorne, a man with a gun on his hip and a shadow in his eyes, rode into Granite Hollow and asked where she lived, everyone assumed the worst. Narlin assumed the worst too. She prepared herself for a fight or a violation. She thought he wanted her body. But when he finally stood on her porch, the answer he gave her didn't just leave her in tears. It unleashed a secret that would burn the entire town to the ground. This is the true-to-life saga of the cowboy and the widow. The heat in Granite Hollow wasn't just a temperature. It was a physical weight pressing down on the pine slats of the boardwalks and baking the dust into a fine, choking powder. It was August 14th, 1884. We know the date because of the ledger entry in Thaddeus Miller's general store, a dusty book that still exists in county records today, marking the purchase of a 50-pound sack of flour and a box of Winchester shells by a man named Caleb Thorne. But before Caleb Thorne ever stepped foot in that store, there was Narlin. Narlin was 30 years old, though the sun and the grief had etched lines around her eyes that made her look older. She was Chiricahua Apache, the widow of a man named Chayton, who had died in a federal prison in Texas 2 years prior. In the eyes of the white settlers of Granite Hollow, Narlin was nothing more than a stray dog they hadn't figured out how to kick out yet. She lived in a small rotting cabin 3 miles out of town on a patch of scrubland that bordered the rich grazing fields of the Double R Ranch. That land was the problem. The owner of the Double R, a man named Josiah Rourke, wanted it. He didn't want it for the grass. It was mostly rock and sagebrush. He wanted it because he hated the idea of an Indian squaw looking down on his cattle. On this particular Tuesday, Narlin walked into town. She kept her head down, her dark hair pulled back in a severe braid, her dress a faded calico that had been patched so many times it was more thread than fabric. She walked straight to Miller's general store, clutching $3 silver money she had earned washing clothes for the few miners who didn't care about the color of her skin. As she stepped inside, the conversation died. 3 men were leaning against the counter. One was Josiah Rourke himself, a man built like a barrel with a red gin-blossomed nose. The other 2 were his hands, the brutish Grady brothers, Bill and Sam. "Well, look what the wind blew in," Rourke sneered, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the brass spittoon near his boot. "Smell that, boys. Smells like smoke and desperation." Narlin didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that reacting only fed the wolves. She walked to the counter where Thaddeus Miller stood wiping his hands on a dirty apron. Thaddeus was a weak man, the kind who went whichever way the wind blew, and today, with Rourke in the room, the wind was blowing cold. "I need flour," Narlin said, her voice soft but steady. "And coffee. The Arbuckle's brand." Thaddeus glanced nervously at Rourke. Rourke nodded slowly, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "That'll be $4, Thaddeus said. Narlin looked up, her dark eyes flashing. "It was $2 last week. I have 3. "Price went up," Rourke interrupted, stepping away from the counter to loom over her. "Inflation, darling, or maybe just an Indian tax. You don't like it. You can go back to that shack of yours and eat dirt." Narlin's hand tightened on the silver coins until her knuckles turned white. She needed that food. Winter was coming early this year. She could feel it in the wind coming off the Mogollon Rim, and her supplies were dangerously low. "Please," she said, hating the word, "I have $3. $3 will buy you a one-way ticket out of my town." Bill Grady laughed, stepping closer. He reached out his dirty fingers, brushing against the sleeve of her dress. "Or maybe we can work out a trade. You used to be a pretty thing before the sun dried you out. Nalin slapped his hand away. The sound cracked through the silent store like a pistol shot. Bill's face went red. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it hard. "You little savage!" The bell above the door jingled. Everyone froze. The air in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't just a customer entering. It felt like a predator had walked into a pen of sheep. The man in the doorway was tall, covered in the dust of the trail. He wore a low-brimmed Stetson that shadowed his eyes and a duster coat that was open just enough to reveal the pearl handle of a Colt Peacemaker on his hip. He didn't look at Rourke. He didn't look at the Gradys. He looked straight at Nalin. This was Caleb Thorne. "Let her go," Caleb said. His voice wasn't loud. It was a low rumble, like distant thunder. Bill Grady sneered, though he didn't let go of Nalin's wrist. "This ain't your business, stranger. This here is a town matter." Caleb took 2 steps forward. The spurs on his boots chimed a chilling metallic sound. "I said let her go." Rourke, sensing the danger, put a hand on Bill's shoulder. "Easy, Bill. Let the squaw go." Bill shoved Nalin away. She stumbled back against the pickle barrel, clutching her bruised wrist. She looked at the stranger, expecting to see lust or contempt. Instead, she saw something she couldn't place. Recognition, sorrow. Caleb walked to the counter, reached into his vest, and slapped a gold coin down on the wood. It spun for a second before settling. A $10 eagle. A fortune in those parts. "Give the lady her flour," Caleb said to Thaddeus, "and the coffee, and throw in a side of bacon." Thaddeus scrambled to comply, his hands shaking as he measured out the goods. The room was silent as Nalin took the heavy sack. She didn't say thank you. She couldn't. Shame burned in her chest, hotter than the anger. A white man buying her food. In Granite Hollow, that usually meant one thing. He was buying her. She looked Caleb in the eye. "I don't sell myself," she hissed low enough that only he could hear. Caleb's expression didn't change. "I didn't ask you to." Nalin grabbed her supplies and fled the store, the bell jingling frantically behind her. She ran not just from Rourke and his men, but from the terrifying uncertainty of what this stranger wanted. Behind her inside the store, Rourke looked at Caleb with narrowed eyes. "You got a taste for the wild ones, stranger. You better be careful. That one's cursed. Her husband died rotting in a cage, and she's halfway to joining him." Caleb turned slowly to face the cattle baron. "I'm not looking for advice," he said cold. "I'm looking for a place to stable my horse, and I'm looking for a quiet drink. Anyone bothers me while I do either. We're going to have a problem." He walked out, leaving Rourke fuming. But as Caleb stepped onto the boardwalk, he didn't head for the saloon. He watched the dust cloud settling in the distance where Nalin had run. He knew exactly where she lived. He had the map in his saddlebag. And he knew that tonight he would have to tell her the truth. Night fell over the high desert like a heavy blanket. The wind picked up howling through the cracks in Nalin's cabin walls. It was a pitiful structure. One room a mud brick fireplace, and a roof that leaked whenever the rains came. Nalin sat by the fire, cleaning her husband's old Winchester rifle. It was the only thing Chayton had left her that had any value, and she kept it loaded. Her heart was still pounding from the encounter in town. She couldn't get the stranger's face out of her mind. Caleb Thorne. He hadn't looked at her like the other men. He hadn't looked at her with hate, nor with that hungry, predatory lust she saw in Bill Grady's eyes. He had looked at her with duty, and that frightened her more than anything. A man with a sense of duty was a dangerous thing. If he felt he had bought her with that $10 gold piece he would come to collect. A twig snapped outside. Nalin froze. She blew out the kerosene lamp, plunging the room into darkness, save for the dying embers of the fire. She lifted the rifle, pressing the stock against her shoulder, aiming at the heavy wooden door. "Go away," she shouted, her voice trembling slightly. "I have a gun, and I will use it." Silence. then the heavy crunch of boots on the gravel. "Narlin," a voice called out. It was him, the man from the store. "It's Caleb Thorne. I'm not here to hurt you." "That's what they all say," Nayland yelled back. "You think because you paid for my flour you own me. Leave now, or I swear by the spirit of my ancestors, I will put a bullet in your chest." "I don't want the flour back." Caleb's voice came through the wood, calm and steady. "And I don't want what you think I want. Open the door, Narlin. We need to talk about Chayton." The name hit her like a physical blow. Chayton. No one in Granite Hollow spoke his name. To them, he was just that dead Apache renegade. Narlin lowered the rifle an inch. "What do you know about Chayton?" "I know he didn't die of fever in that prison," Caleb said. "And I know about the stash." Narlin's breath hitched. The stash. It was a rumor. A myth. Before Chayton was captured by the U.S. Marshals 3 years ago, he was rumored to have robbed a Wells Fargo shipment bound for Santa Fe. The gold was never found. Chayton had sworn to her on the night he was taken that he was innocent. He had sworn he never took it. But the town, and specifically Josiah Rourke, believed he had hidden it somewhere on this land. That was why Rourke wanted the property. He didn't want the grazing land. He wanted the gold he believed was buried under her floorboards. If this stranger knew about the stash, he was a bounty hunter. Or worse. "If you come in," Narlin said, "keep your hands where I can see them." "Fair enough." Narlin moved to the door and unlatched the heavy wooden bar. She kicked the door open, stepping back quickly, the rifle trained on the opening. Caleb Thorne stood there, framed by the moonlight. He had his hands raised to shoulder height, palms open. He looked even bigger in the small cabin filling the doorway. "Come in," she commanded. Slowly. Caleb stepped inside and kicked the door shut with his heel. He looked around the meager shack, the dirt floor, the single cot, the empty cupboards. A flash of pain crossed his eyes, gone as quickly as it came. "Talk." Narlin set her finger tight on the trigger. "Who are you?" "I was in Texas," Caleb said, lowering his hands slowly, though he made no move for his gun. "I was a guard at the Huntsville Penitentiary. Block C." Narlin's eyes widened. You were his jailer." "I was the only man who listened to him," Caleb corrected. "Chayton didn't last long in there. The consumption took him bad. But in those last weeks we talked. He told me about you. He told me about this land. He told you where the gold is." Narlin spat disgust, curling her lip. "You're just another treasure hunter." Caleb reached into his duster pocket. Narlin's rifle jerked up, aiming for his head. "Easy," Caleb said softly. "Just a letter." He pulled out a folded, stained piece of parchment and held it out. Narlin hesitated, then snatched it from his hand with her free hand, keeping the gun trained on him. She moved closer to the fireplace to read it by the ember light. It was Chayton's handwriting, rough, jagged. "My beloved Narlin, if you are reading this, I am gone to the ancestors. This man, Mr. Thorne, he is not like the others. I have told him the truth. Not about the gold. There never was any gold, you know this. I have told him the truth about Rourke. Trust him. He has promised to pay a debt he thinks he owes me. Let him help. Yours, Chayton." Narlin read it twice. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the ink. A debt. What debt could a white guard owe an Apache prisoner? Caleb took off his hat, revealing a scar that ran from his hairline down to his eyebrow. There was a riot in the yard 6 months before he died. 3 men cornered me. I was down, knife at my throat. The other guards were too slow. Chayton, he stepped in. He took a shiv in the ribs that was meant for my kidney. He saved my life, Narlin. A man he had every right to hate. Caleb stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. He made me promise. He said Rourke framed him for that robbery to get this land. He said Rourke needs this land because of what's under it. And it ain't gold. Nalin lowered the gun, her legs feeling weak. What is it then? Water, Caleb said. Deep aquifer. The railroad is coming through in 2 years. They need a water stop. This land, this specific patch of rock, sits on top of the biggest spring in the territory. Rourke knows it. If he gets this land, he sells the water rights to the railroad for millions. If you keep it, you're the richest woman in Arizona. Nalin stared at him, the reality crashing down on her. It wasn't about gold. It was about survival. Rourke had destroyed her husband, ruined her life, and starved her out, all for water. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "You could have taken the land. You could have partnered with Rourke." Caleb looked at her, his blue eyes fierce. "I looked your husband in the eye when he died. I told him I'd look after you, and I told him I'd make the men who did this to him pay." He reached out and gently pushed the barrel of the rifle down until it pointed at the floor. "I don't want your body, Nalin. I want your permission. I want your permission to start a war." Nalin looked at this stranger, this cowboy who had ridden into hell for a ghost. Tears finally spilled over her cheeks, hot and fast. For 2 years, she had been prey. Tonight, for the first time, she was being offered a weapon. "Do it," she whispered. "Burn them down." The sun rose over the Superstition Mountains like a spill of molten copper, illuminating the stark poverty of Nalin's homestead. For the first time in 2 years, however, the silence of the morning was broken by the rhythmic thwack-crack of an axe splitting wood. Nalin stood in the doorway of her cabin, a tin cup of bitter black coffee in her hand. She watched Caleb Thorne. He had stripped off his duster and his vest, working in a sweat-stained Henley shirt, his suspenders hanging loose at his hips. He was splitting logs from a dead ironwood treewood, so hard it usually broke axes. But Caleb swung with a terrifying, precise violence. Every blow was a release of anger. She watched the muscles in his back bunch and release. She hadn't slept. She had spent the night sitting in the corner, clutching the Winchester, watching him sleep on the floor by the door. He had slept like a dog, one eye open, hand resting on the butt of his Colt. "You'll dull the blade," Nalin called out, her voice raspy from the smoke of the fire. Caleb paused, wiping his forehead with his forearm. He leaned on the axe handle, looking at her. The morning light caught the blue of his eyes, making them look almost unnatural against his tanned skin. "Blade can be sharpened," he said. "Cold nights are coming. You need a stockpile." "I survived 2 winters without you, Caleb Thorne." "Survived," he repeated, looking at the sagging roof of the cabin. "Not lived. Just survived." He walked over, taking the cup of coffee she offered. His fingers brushed hers, rough callus against rough callus. A spark, purely electric, jumped between them. Nalin pulled her hand back as if burned. "I'm going into town," Caleb announced, taking a sip. "I need to file a claim amendment at the land office. If Rourke wants to play legal games with water rights, we need to make sure Chayton's original deed is ironclad." "You go into town today, you might not come back," Nalin warned. "Rourke owns the sheriff. Sheriff Barron is a man who thinks the law is whatever fits in his pocket." Caleb set the cup down on the porch railing. He strapped his gun belt back on, checking the cylinder of the peacemaker. "I've known men like Barron. They're brave when they're holding the leash, but they get real quiet when the dog bites back. Lock the door when I leave. Don't open it for anyone but me." Granite Hollow was buzzing. The gossip had spread faster than a grass fire. The Apache widow has a man. When Caleb rode his roan gelding down the main street, curtains twitched. Men stopped their conversations mid-sentence. He tied his horse in front of the land office, ignoring the stairs, and pushed through the door. The clerk was a thin, bird-like man named Percival Finch. He looked up, adjusting his spectacles, and paled when he saw Caleb. I need to see the survey maps for plot 404, Caleb said, leaning on the counter. The Chayton claim. Finch swallowed hard. I can't do that, sir. That file is under review. Under review by who? By me, a voice boomed from the back office. Josiah Rourke stepped out, smoking a thick cigar. He looked fresh, clean-shaven, and utterly confident. He wore a suit that cost more than Narlin's entire life earnings. Mr. Thorne. Rourke smiled, though his eyes were dead. I heard we had a visitor. I didn't realize you were a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, Caleb said, his voice dropping to that dangerous rumble. I'm the executor of Chayton's will. Rourke laughed, a harsh, barking sound. An Indian will? That's not worth the paper it's written on in this territory. Look, son, you seem like a capable man. Why throw your life away for a squaw? I'll make you an offer. $500. You get on your horse, you ride to California, and you forget you ever saw Granite Hollow. Caleb stared at him. You framed him. You knew the railroad was coming, so you hired men to hit the stagecoach, planted the evidence on Chayton, and let him rot in Huntsville. The room went deadly silent. Rourke took the cigar out of his mouth. That is a serious accusation. Slander, in fact. It's only slander if it's not true, Caleb said. I know about the water, Rourke, and I know you don't have the rights yet. If Narlin stays on that land another 6 months, squatters' rights turn into permanent patent under the Homestead Act extension of '82. You're running out of time. Rourke's face turned a mottled purple. He leaned across the counter, his voice a hiss. You think you can stop me? I built this town. I am the law here. You're just a drifter with a $10 pistol. You go back to that shack and you tell her this. Tonight the wind changes. If she's smart, she'll be gone by sundown. Caleb turned his back on Rourke, a calculated insult, and walked out. But as he stepped onto the boardwalk, he saw it. Sheriff Barron was standing by Caleb's horse. Barron was a heavy-set man with a tin star pinned to a greasy vest. He was running his hand over the roan saddlebags. Nice horse, Barron grunted as Caleb approached. Looks like one that was reported stolen out of Prescott last week. I have the bill of sale, Caleb said, unhooking the leather strap over his gun hammer. Paperwork can be forged, Barron said, spitting on the ground. I've got half a mind to impound it. Touch the horse again, Sheriff, and you'll be impounding lead, Caleb said. The threat hung in the air. A crowd had gathered. Barron looked at Caleb's hand hovering over his gun, then looked at the crowd. He couldn't back down, but he didn't want to die. Get out of here, Barron growled. But watch your back, Thorne. Accidents happen on these roads. Caleb mounted up and rode out his spine, tingling. He knew Rourke's warning wasn't idle. Tonight. He spurred the horse into a gallop. He had to get back to Narlin. They had to fortify. Night came with a vengeance. The moon was obscured by heavy clouds, making the scrubland pitch black. Inside the cabin, Caleb had overturned the heavy oak table, pushing it against the window. He had doused the fire to hide their position. Narlin lay prone on the floor, the Winchester barrel resting on the windowsill. They will come, Narlin whispered. Rourke doesn't make threats. He doesn't keep. I know, Caleb said. He was checking his ammunition. He had 40 rounds for the Colt and a box of shells for Narlin's rifle. Listen to me, Narlin. If they breach the door, you go out the back shutter. You run for the creek bed. Do not look back for me. I am not leaving my home, she said fiercely. I ran from them for 2 years. Tonight I stop running. Caleb looked at her in the dark. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder. Good girl. Then the first bottle came. It smashed against the front porch, a glass bottle filled with kerosene and a burning rag. Flames roared up instantly, licking at the dry wood of the doorframe. Fire! Narlin screamed. Don't shoot yet, Caleb roared. Wait for a target. Through the flames, shadows moved, 3 men on horseback circling the cabin, whooping like demons. It was the Grady brothers and another hired gun. "Burn the witch out," Bill Grady shouted, firing a pistol into the roof. "Now!" Caleb yelled. Narlin squeezed the trigger. The Winchester bucked against her shoulder. She missed the rider, but hit the horse's flank. The animal reared, throwing the rider into the dirt. Caleb stood up, using the window frame for stability. He didn't fire wildly. He took a breath, aimed, and fired. Bang! A man screamed. Sam Grady dropped his torch, clutching his shoulder. "They're shooting back," Sam yelled. "The bitch has teeth. Bullets shredded the wood of the cabin walls. Splinters flew like shrapnel." Caleb grabbed Narlin and pulled her down as a slug shattered the whiskey jar on the shelf behind her. "The roof," Caleb coughed. The smoke was getting thick. "They're trying to smoke us out." He crawled to the door. "Cover me." "What are you doing?" "I'm putting out the fire." Caleb kicked the door open. The heat was intense. He grabbed a heavy wool blanket he had soaked in the water bucket earlier. He had prepared for this and charged onto the porch. Bill Grady saw him. "There he is! Kill him!" Bill leveled his shotgun. Narlin from the floor inside saw the moonlight glint on the shotgun barrel. She didn't think. She didn't aim. She just fired. The bullet hit the stock of Bill's shotgun, shattering the wood and sending the weapon flying from his hands. The force broke Bill's fingers. He howled in pain. Caleb slammed the wet blanket against the burning doorframe, smothering the flames. He drew his Colt and fired 2 shots into the darkness, suppressing the 3rd gunman. "Pull back!" Bill screamed, clutching his mangled hand. "Pull back, damn it!" The riders turned and galloped away, disappearing into the blackness of the desert. Caleb stood on the smoking porch, chest heaving. He waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then he turned back to the cabin. Narlin was still on the floor, the rifle trembling in her hands. She was hyperventilating. Caleb walked over, holstered his gun, and knelt beside her. He didn't say a word. He just pulled her into his arms. Narlin collapsed against him, burying her face in his chest. She sobbed violent, shaking sobs that had been held back for years. She smelled the gunpowder and the smoke and the sweat on him, and for the first time since Chayton died, she felt safe. "We beat them," Caleb whispered into her hair, rocking her gently. "We beat them, Narlin." But as he held her, looking out at the charred doorframe, Caleb knew this wasn't a victory. It was just the opening move. Rourke wouldn't send drunk cowboys next time. Next time, he would bring the war. The next morning, the air in the cabin tasted of ash. The front door was charred black, half hanging off its hinges. Sunlight streamed in through bullet holes in the walls, creating beams of dust that danced in the silence. Narlin was sweeping up the glass from the broken lantern. Her movements were mechanical stiff. The adrenaline of the night fight had faded, leaving a cold, hard dread in her stomach. Caleb was outside examining the tracks. He walked back in his face grim. "3 of them," he said. "Bill Grady won't be shooting a gun anytime soon. You took off 2 of his fingers." Narlin didn't smile. "He has a left hand, and he has brothers." "We can't stay on the defensive," Caleb said, pouring water from a canteen. "If we sit here, they'll just pick us off or burn the place down when we're sleeping. We need to hit them where they aren't expecting it." "We can't outshoot Rourke's money," Narlin said. "He can hire an army." "We don't shoot him," Caleb said. "We sue him." Narlin looked at him as if he were mad. "I told you the law here is—" "I know," Caleb interrupted. "But Rourke answers to investors. I saw the telegrams in his office when he opened the door. He's backed by a syndicate in San Francisco. If there is a legitimate legal dispute over the land title, the railroad freezes negotiations. Rourke needs that deal to close now to pay off his loans. If we jam up the gears, he bleeds cash." "We need a lawyer," Narlin said. "No lawyer in Granite Hollow will help me." "There is one," Caleb said. "I asked around yesterday before Rourke found me. There's a man named Silas Vane, lives above the livery stable. They say he was the best legal mind in the territory until he found the bottom of a whiskey bottle. He's a drunk, Narlin scoffed. I've seen him sleeping in the horse troughs. He's a drunk who hates Rourke, Caleb corrected. Apparently Rourke stole Vane's wife 5 years ago. Hate is a powerful, sobering agent. They rode into town together this time. Narlin sat behind Caleb on the roan, her arms wrapped around his waist. The contact made her skin prickle. The town was eerily quiet. People watched them pass, but no one spoke. They were pariahs now, dangerous ones. They found Silas Vane in the hayloft of the livery. He was a disheveled mess of a man, wearing a suit that was 10 years out of fashion and covered in straw. He was nursing a headache and a bottle of cheap rye. Go away, Vane groaned, covering his eyes from the light. I'm deceased. We need you to file an injunction, Caleb said, kicking Vane's boot. Vane peered through his fingers. He saw Caleb, then he saw Nayland. He sat up, blinking. The Apache widow, and the cowboy knight. You two are the talk of the breakfast tables. I heard you shot Bill Grady's thumb off. We need to stop Rourke from finalizing the water rights deal, Caleb said. We have the original deed. Vane laughed, a dry, hacking sound. Deed Rourke doesn't care about deeds. He'll just say, Chayton was a felon, and the land was forfeited. Chayton wasn't a felon when he signed the deed over to Narlin, Caleb said. He did it 3 days before the robbery. The land was never his to forfeit. It was hers. Vane stopped laughing. He looked at Narlin. Is that true? Narlin nodded. We went to the priest in Tucson. Chayton transferred the title to my Christian name, Mary Narlin, to protect it. Vane whistled low. That is actually brilliant. If the land was in your name before the alleged crime, the government seizure is void. But the records would be in Tucson, not here. Can you draft the papers? Caleb asked. Vane looked at the bottle of rye, then at Narlin's desperate eyes. He sighed, capping the bottle. I'll need paper. And coffee. Lots of coffee. If I do this, Rourke will kill me. If you don't do it, the whiskey will kill you anyway, Caleb said. At least this way, you die a legend. Vane grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. I like your style, cowboy. Let's go to the courthouse. The plan was simple. Vane would file the injunction at the local courthouse, forcing the county judge, who was less corrupt than the sheriff, to acknowledge the dispute. This would trigger a telegraph to the territorial capital, freezing Rourke's assets. Caleb stood guard outside the courthouse doors, his hand resting on his gun. Narlin waited inside with Vane. Minutes ticked by like hours. Caleb watched the street. It was too quiet. Suddenly, a boy ran up to him, a street urchin no older than 10. Mister, you gotta help. Caleb looked down. What is it, son? There's a man hurt in the alley behind the saloon. He says he knows you. He says his name is Chayton. Caleb froze. It was impossible. Chayton was dead. He had buried him, but the sheer shock of the name made him move. Show me. He followed the boy into the narrow alleyway between the saloon and the barber shop. It was a dead end, filled with trash and crates. Where is he? Caleb asked, turning to the boy. The boy was gone. The realization hit Caleb a split second too late. It's a trap. From the shadows, a heavy wooden club swung down. It connected with the back of Caleb's head with a sickening crunch. Caleb's vision exploded into white light, then faded to black. He crumpled to the ground. When he woke, the world was spinning. He was being dragged. He could smell sawdust and stale beer. He was inside the saloon. He tried to stand, but his hands were cuffed behind his back. Look who's awake, a voice sneered. Sheriff Barron stood over him. But it was the other man in the room that made Caleb's blood run cold. Josiah Rourke sat at a poker table shuffling a deck of cards. You have been a very troublesome fly in my ointment, Mr. Thorne, Rourke said smoothly. "Where is Nalin?" Caleb rasped, struggling against the cuffs. "Oh, she's busy filing her little papers," Rourke said. "But she won't be finishing that. You see, we have a problem. A murder." Rourke gestured to the corner of the room. A body lay there, covered by a sheet. Barron pulled the sheet back. It was the boy, the street urchin, who had lured Caleb into the alley. His neck was broken. Caleb felt bile rise in his throat. You killed a child." "Me no," Rourke said, feigning shock. "You did. Drunken rage. Tragedy, really. Witnesses saw you drag him into the alley. Sheriff Barron found you standing over the body. You sick son of a—" Caleb lunged, but Barron kicked him hard in the ribs. Caleb collapsed, gasping for air. "This is a hanging offense, Caleb," Rourke said, standing up. "Swift justice is what this town demands. By tomorrow morning you'll be swinging from the cottonwood tree. And Nalin, well, a woman whose lover just murdered a child. The town won't be very kind to her. She'll be lucky if they only run her out." Rourke leaned down his face, inches from Caleb's. "I told you, I am the law." The doors of the saloon swung open. Nalin stood there, Silas Vane behind her. "Caleb!" she screamed, seeing him on the floor, blood running down his forehead. "Arrest her too," Barron ordered his deputies. "Accessory to murder." 2 men grabbed Nalin. She fought, scratching and biting, but they overpowered her. Silas Vane tried to intervene, but Barron backhanded him, sending the lawyer sprawling. "Nalin!" Caleb shouted. "Don't sign anything! Don't!" Barron slammed the butt of his pistol into Caleb's temple. This time the darkness was total. Nalin screamed as she was dragged away, not to a cell, but thrown out into the dusty street. "Get out of my town!" Barron yelled from the saloon steps. "And take your lawyer with you. If you're not gone by sunrise, you'll watch your boyfriend hang." Nalin lay in the dirt, the taste of dust and blood in her mouth. She looked up at the saloon. Caleb was in there. They were going to kill him. And it was her fault. She had trusted the law. She had trusted the system. She stood up slowly, wiping the blood from her lip. Her eyes were dry now. The tears were gone. Silas Vane crawled over to her, groaning. "It's over, Nalin. We have to go. They'll kill us." Nalin looked at the setting sun, red as blood. She reached into her dress pocket. She didn't have the deed, but she had something else Caleb had given her earlier. The key to the lockbox on his saddle. "No," Nalin said, her voice sounding like grinding stones. "We are not going." "What can we do?" Vane cried. "They have the guns. They have the sheriff." Nalin turned to the lawyer. The look in her eyes made him step back. It was the look of her ancestors. It was the look of Geronimo. "They have the sheriff," Nalin said, "but I have the Apache." She looked toward the mountains, where the smoke of distant fires curled into the sky. Her cousins, the ones who hadn't surrendered, the ones the army called renegades. She had avoided them for years, trying to live the white man's way. But the white man's way had failed. "Tonight," Nalin whispered, "we take the town." The ascent into the Dragoon Mountains was a path no white man in Granite Hollow dared to tread. It was a labyrinth of razor-sharp shale, blinding slot canyons, and silence so profound it felt like a predator holding its breath. Nalin rode the stolen livery horse hard. The animal was frothing its sides, heaving, but she didn't spare the whip. She couldn't. Down in the valley, the sun had set on Caleb Thorne's life. Up here in the cold moonlight, she was hunting for his salvation. She wasn't Mary Nayland anymore. That woman, the washerwoman who kept her head down, the widow who begged for credit at the store, had been left in the dust outside the saloon. She was Nalin, daughter of the Chiricahua wife of Chayton. She had unbraided her hair, letting it flow wild and black in the wind. She had torn the heavy Victorian skirt of her dress to her knees to allow her to ride astride. She had rubbed dirt and ash on her face, to mask the shine of her skin in the moonlight. She reached the pass known as Coyote's Throat just after midnight. Suddenly, the horse reared, whinnying in terror. Nalin held the reins tight, calming the beast. "Peace," she whispered. "They are here." Shadows detached themselves from the rocks. 3 men. They didn't wear the cowboy hats or dusters of the valley. They wore headbands of red cloth buckskin shirts and carried Winchester repeating rifles that looked well-maintained. The leader stepped forward. It was Talset. He was her cousin, though they hadn't spoken in 5 years. His face was a map of scars, his eyes hard as flint. "You are far from your white masters, Nalin," Talset said in their native tongue. He didn't raise his rifle, but he didn't lower it either. "Have they finally grown tired of you?" "They are going to hang an innocent man at dawn," Nalin replied, her voice steady. "A man who fought for Chaitan, a man who knows where the water is." Talset spat on the ground. "Let them hang him. One less white devil to steal our breath." "This one is different," Nalin insisted, sliding off the horse. She stood tall, meeting her cousin's gaze. "He is the one Chaitan wrote to. He came to give me back the land. But Rourke framed him. He killed a child tonight, Talset. A boy. And he blamed it on Caleb." Talset's expression flickered. The killing of children was a taboo that transcended race or war. "Rourke," he growled. "The fat spider." "He wants the water," Nalin said. "The spring beneath my cabin. If he gets it, the iron horse comes. The train brings more soldiers, more fences, more death. If Rourke wins this mountain, your mountain dies too." The other 2 warriors looked at Talset. The logic was sound. Rourke wasn't just Nalin's enemy. He was the architect of their slow strangulation. "We have 12 rifles," Talset said. "The town has 50 men." "The town has 50 cowards," Nalin corrected. "They fight for money. We fight for blood. And we have the night." Talset looked at her for a long moment. He saw the fire in her eyes, a fire he thought had been extinguished by grief and assimilation. He nodded slowly. "We ride," Talset said. "Not for the white man, but for the water. And for Chaitan." Meanwhile, in the basement cell of the sheriff's office, time was bleeding away. Caleb sat on the cold stone floor. His head throbbed with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. The blood from the pistol whip had dried, crusting over his left eye, sealing it shut. The door creaked open. Sheriff Barron walked in carrying a lantern and a stool. He set the stool down and sat groaning under his own weight. He placed a bottle of whiskey on the floor between them. "Last meal," Barron grunted. "Or last drink anyway. Rourke's feeling generous." Caleb didn't look at the bottle. He looked at Barron with his one good eye. "Does it bother you, Barron, knowing you're going to hell?" Barron chuckled, a sound like dry leaves crunching. "Hell is just a place poor people go, Thorn. Men like me, men like Rourke, we make our own arrangements." "You killed a kid," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. "That wasn't Rourke. That was you. I saw your boot prints in the alley." Barron's smile vanished. He leaned forward, the lamplight casting long, distorted shadows on the damp walls. "The boy was a thief. Nobody's gonna miss a gutter rat, just like nobody's gonna miss a drifter ex-guard." "Nalin will miss me," Caleb said. "The squaw." Barron laughed again, harsh and loud. "She's halfway to Mexico by now, if she's smart. If she's dumb, she's freezing to death in the desert. Either way, she ain't coming for you, cowboy. You're alone." "I'm never alone," Caleb whispered. "What's that?" I said. Caleb raised his head, a terrifying calmness on his face. "I'm never alone, and you should have killed me in that alley." Barron stood up, unsettled by the prisoner's demeanor. He kicked the whiskey bottle over, watching the amber liquid spill across the stone. "Have it your way. Dawn is in 2 hours. Try to get some sleep." Baron left, locking the heavy iron door. The sound of the tumblers clicking into place echoed like a gunshot. Caleb shifted. He reached into his boot. They had taken his gun belt, his knife, and his spurs. But they hadn't checked the lining of his left boot. His fingers grazed the thin, flat piece of metal. A lockpick. It was a trick he had learned from a safecracker in Huntsville prison. He pulled it out. His hands were shaking from the concussion, but he forced them to steady. He crawled to the cell door. The lock was old, a simple lever mechanism. He inserted the pick. Click. He twisted. Click. Nothing. He cursed softly, wiping sweat from his brow. He tried again, visualizing the tumblers inside. 1, 2, 3. The lock gave a heavy thunk. Caleb froze. He waited to see if the noise had alerted the deputy upstairs. Silence. He pushed the door. It swung open an inch. He was free of the cell, but he was still in the wolf's den. And he didn't just want to escape. He wanted to burn the den down. Granite Hollow slept the sleep of the wicked, unaware that the mountains had come to collect their due. In the town square, the gallows waited fresh pine towering against the pre-dawn sky. Josiah Rourke stood on the hotel balcony, admiring his handiwork, a cup of tea in hand. "Perfect," he murmured. Then the air hissed. Thwack! A deputy guarding the gallows gasped, looking down at the arrow protruding from his chest before collapsing silently. From the shadows, Talset and his warriors moved like smoke. A torch was thrown, and the sheriff's office erupted into a pillar of flame. "Fire!" a voice screamed. "We're under attack!" The town awoke to hell. Miners and cowboys stumbled into the street, only to be pinned down by precision rifle fire from the rooftops. Narlin didn't shoot to kill the townsfolk. She shot the locks off the corral. A dozen panicked Mustangs thundered down Main Street, scattering Rourke's hired guns. In the burning basement of the jail, Caleb kicked the cell door open. The smoke was blinding. He scrambled up the stairs, grabbing a double-barreled shotgun from the rack, just as the roof began to groan. He kicked the front door down and stepped out into the inferno, a demon rising from the ashes. Sheriff Barron was cowering behind a water trough. Caleb didn't hesitate. He marched through the gunfire, blasted the wooden trough into splinters, and hauled the wet, terrified sheriff into the street. "Tell them!" Caleb roared, jamming the hot shotgun barrel under Barron's chin. "Tell them who killed the boy!" High above on the balcony, Rourke screamed, "Shoot him! He's escaping! It wasn't him!" Barron shrieked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "It was Rourke. Rourke made me kill the kid to frame him." The mob froze. The truth hit them harder than a bullet. Rourke, realizing he had lost control, raised his rifle to silence Barron. Bang! The shot didn't come from Rourke. It came from the shadows of the blacksmith shop, 50 yards away. Narlin stood there, her husband's Winchester smoking. Rourke staggered back, clutching a shattered shoulder. The crowd surged toward her. The hotel enraged. "Burn him out!" they yelled. "No!" Caleb shouted, stepping between the mob and the hotel. He ripped the tin star off Barron's vest and pinned it to his own bloody shirt. "He belongs to the law, real law." He looked at Narlin. She stood amidst the smoke, flanked by her Apache cousins, looking like a queen of war. She nodded once. Caleb stormed the hotel, kicking open Rourke's door. The tycoon huddled in the corner, clutching a derringer. "It's over, Josiah," Caleb said, his voice cold iron. "You're under arrest." He marched the bleeding tycoon out onto the balcony. Below, the town fell silent. Caleb looked down at Narlin across the dusty street. They had burned the corruption out of Granite Hollow, not with hatred, but with the one thing Rourke never accounted for: the truth. The war was won. Now they just had to survive the peace. 6 months later, the sound that echoed through Granite Hollow wasn't gunfire, it was the whistle of the Southern Pacific locomotive. The train didn't just pass through, it stopped. It stopped at the newly built water tower on the border of the Double R, now legally renamed the Narlin and Thorn Watercomb. Josiah Rourke had been hanged in Tucson 3 months prior, his confession sealing his fate. Sheriff Barron was serving 20 years in Yuma. Silas Vane, clean-shaven and sober, was the newly appointed town magistrate, ensuring that the law finally protected everyone, not just the rich. Narlin stood on the porch of her new home. It wasn't a shack anymore. It was a sturdy ranch house made of white, pine, and stone. She wore a dress of fine blue silk, but on her feet she still wore her moccasins. She was the wealthiest woman in the territory, the water queen, who held the contract that kept the railroad running. Caleb walked up the steps, dusting off his hat. He had spent the day overseeing the herd her herd. "Train's on time," Caleb said, leaning against the railing next to her. "It usually is." Narlin smiled. She looked at him. The scars on his face had healed, but the look in his eyes, that fierce devotion, hadn't changed. "You know," Caleb said softly, looking out at the green valley, "I've been thinking. The contract with the railroad is signed. The house is built. The war is over. My debt to Chayton. It's paid." Narlin's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment she had feared. The cowboy had done his duty. Was this goodbye? "So," she whispered, her throat tight, "are you moving on? Seeking the next fight?" Caleb turned to her. He reached out his hand, cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away the fear in her eyes. "Narlin," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her chest. "I told you the first day I met you. I didn't want your body. I didn't want your land. Then what do you want, Caleb Thorne?" He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I want to wake up every morning and see you safe. I want to grow old watching this valley with you. I don't want to move on. I want to come home." Tears pricked Narlin's eyes, but they were tears of pure joy. She covered his hand with hers. "Then stay," she whispered. "Stay forever." The cowboy kissed the Apache widow as the sun dipped below the Dragoon Mountains, painting the sky in colors of victory. They had walked through fire to find each other, and in the end they found that the greatest treasure wasn't the gold or the water. It was the peace they built together. And that, folks, is the legend of Narlin and Caleb. They say if you go down to that part of Arizona today, you can still find the foundation of that old water tower. It stands as a monument to a woman who refused to break, and a man who proved that honor wasn't dead in the Wild West. They took on a tyrant, fought the law, and rewrote history with nothing but grit and a Winchester rifle. What did you think of their journey? Would you have had the courage to stand your ground like Narlin, or ride into a trap like Caleb? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story got your heart racing, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good Western, and make sure you are subscribed with the notification bell turned on. We have plenty more true-to-life tales of outlaws, heroes, and frontier justice coming your way next week. Until then, keep your powder dry.